On today's podcast, we have a very special guest, Rico Csabai. Rico is very special to me because he was one of my very first students when I started teaching at Musicians Institute. And he's gone on to become a very successful artist manager. And we had a great conversation where we got to discuss what it is to manage developing acts in today's music landscape. We also looked at when does an artist need a manager and what does a manager do today as opposed to 5-10 years ago. How acts are finding their audiences and how it differs from genre to genre. We also talked about what's the definition of success and are we redefining success in today's market, as well as the international marketplace and a lot more. You really will find this interesting. Insiders, are you ready? Welcome to MUBUTV's Insider Podcast, where our mission is to educate, empower, and engage artists and music business professionals who are dedicated to having a successful career in the new music industry. Here are your hosts, Rich Ezra and Eric Knight.
Welcome back, Insiders, to another episode of the MUBUTV Insider Podcast, where our mission is to educate, empower, and engage your music career. On today's episode, we sat down with artist manager Rico Csabai to discuss managing developing artists in today's music landscape. When does an artist need a manager? How are today's artists finding their audience? And does it differ from genre to genre? Redefining success in today's market, opportunities in the international marketplace, and much more. You won't want to miss it. But first, a word from our sponsor. Hey Insiders, are you looking to take your music career to the next level? Then you need to know about the Music Business Registry. The Music Business Registry is the leading music industry publisher of the most up-to-date contact information for major and independent record label A&R, music publishers, artist managers, music attorneys, music supervisors, and much more. The Music Business Registry is the trusted industry standard and source serving the music business community for over 28 years with the most accurate and up-to-date contact information available. Their titles include the A&R Registry, the Film and Television Music Monthly, the Music Publisher Registry, and the Music Attorney Registry. All of their publications are available in print, PDF, CSV, or online subscription. Visit them now at musicregistry.com and receive a 10% discount by using coupon code MUBUTV10 at checkout. That's musicregistry.com, coupon code MUBUTV10. When you're ready to put your music to work, musicregistry.com.
Welcome back, Insiders. This week's featured interview is with a good friend of mine. He actually was a student of mine in my first class at Musicians Institute. So I feel very proud of his, career and that, he started with us and now he's going on to, to do the actual thing. His name is Rico Csabai. He's had a lot of years working with artists, many different types of artists, making records, doing tours, traveling internationally. And it was an interesting conversation, he's one of these young artist managers who, really understands how the role, just within his own career, how the role of the artist manager and the services that they provide has transformed over the years. And some of the other interesting things that we talked about, I thought, were how today's audiences are reached and exposed to music and how success is being redefined in the culture that we live in today. There's a lot of different factors that go into what is success, and he talked about that and he talked about the different kinds of examples of that. So there's a lot of great insight information in here, especially for you artists who are looking to work with a manager. And, he talks about the variables, and some of the non-variables with regards to how every situation is different and unique depending on who you're talking about, what style of music, who the person is, who the manager is, and how all those elements have to sort of form a alchemy or a chemistry to make it work.
Yeah, I thought this is a great interview from that perspective. And also, a couple of the points that came to mind were social media and how effective it is for some acts versus others.
Yes.
And that role and how that's played, because I think that's such a critical role in today's era with artists and bands. And also, I thought that was interesting too, that he's not genre specific as a manager. Typically, not in all cases, but typically more times than not, managers tend to be more genre specific.
They do.
And he's one of the rare ones that's not in that area. So I thought that was one of the other things that stood out, because that does take a unique gift of knowing those audiences and those markets and how to navigate those areas.
And reach those audiences.
Absolutely.
It's you don't reach everybody the same way. You're right.
Exactly. So with that, Insiders, sit back, relax, and enjoy our featured interview with Rico Csabai.
Hey, Rico, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure, and I speak to you all.
Good to speak with you. I want to start at the very beginning, which is, basically we always ask our guests, at what point in your life did you know that the music business was going to be your professional career path?
That's funny. Probably as early as I can remember, going back to junior high, playing in bands and stuff like that. It was sort of a non-negotiable deal with myself that I made back then.
Okay. All right. And how did it evolve?
All throughout high school, it's what I did. I was gravitated towards the business side as much as the creative side of it, and then going to school where I met you, Rich, when you were my professor very early on.
Right.
Then that evolved quickly into stopping playing music for a living, into working at a record label, and then starting my own companies and things like that.
Rico, this is Eric, and thank you so much for joining us. We're so excited to have you on the show. Who are some of the artists that you've worked with throughout your career?
Let's see. Going back to, my first gig was at Island Def Jam doing publicity. So I did everything from, the Warped Tour artists like Sum 41 and Andrew WK to Ludacris to Kanye's first album. That stuff really left a mark on me, especially because I was a huge fan of Def Jam, all the way back to my childhood. So definitely getting to sit in the same room with Method Man and Redman and Ludacris and things like that had a huge effect on me. Some of my favorite times ever. Probably the other stuff is, certain management clients that I've really enjoyed working with that have left indelible ink, I think, on my career, like Bonnie McKee. When I looked after her for a period, I probably learned the most working with her than any other client.
Talk about why. What was it that was so invaluable with you with regards to working with Bonnie, who's a very renowned songwriter?
Yeah. I came onto her later in her career, and she'd already had, success that is hard to achieve, and especially hard to even repeat. I think 10 number ones, all the crazy Katy Perry stuff. She had been signed twice as a recording artist, so I had to really learn a side of the business that I didn't know as much, was the real ins and outs of pop songwriting. I'd always come from a rock background, and when we made records, whether if it was Rick Rubin or working with producers like Josh Abraham, it was much less about, going for outside songs, putting together song camps and things like that, like writer camps, which I'd never really done before, even as previous A&R guy. So I think I really got to test my chops and learn a heck of a lot when I thought I already knew a lot. It was challenging. It was fun.
Okay, yeah, because what's interesting is that you were doing a lot of this work with Def Jam and with Bonnie at a time when the music industry, and especially the recording side of things with A&R and with signings and songs, was really transitioning. It was going, as I used to say to other students, it was going through and still remains going through a real radical revolution.
Yes, for sure. I got in the business I think my first job was close to the end of 2003, and it was sort of the last whimpers of the 90s peak success. And then I got to witness sort of everyone contracting their budgets on every side of everything. And it was really a different business for 10 years.
Yeah, it was. That's absolutely true. And it was a slow evolution. And you were part of that, in that you were working in the business during that time. You were at Def Jam. You were working with, a lot of these acts and artists and independent labels. So, I'm asking because, you sort of saw the transition from when you came in. You then became in the thick of it with the transition into the era that we're in now, Absolutely. When I worked I started working at American Recordings, I believe, just around the end of 2005, early 2006. And, that was different because Rick didn't necessarily need to play by the rules, and we didn't need constant hits and market share and things like that. So very much got to do kind of whatever he felt like. So we got to live a little bit on the peripheral, I think, in some ways with him. And that was a period where I was, I was starting my own companies. I had a side management company. I also had a side indie label that we were really trying to embrace digital as early as possible. So, iTunes was remarkable for us between 2007 and 2010, just the way we could get records, really to get a shot there. You know what I mean? Really, on iTunes?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it launched several of my clients' careers and made a lot of money for everyone.
Yeah, and what's interesting is, I mean, I only mentioned, iTunes because it doesn't even exist anymore. This was all streaming, which I don't think even came to America until 2011.
Correct.
But
yeah.
You were talking about an era before. Just as a side note, when you mentioned, working with Rick Rubin, I mean, he's one of the great legends of this business. Have you seen the documentary Shangri-La yet?
I haven't.
Oh, you're in for a treat, because you especially, Rico, because not only are you in the business, but you're also a man who has worked with Rick. So you have intimate inside knowledge about him and his process. It's a 4-hour documentary. It's 4 hours, and it's really, really in depth about the way he works, his philosophy, his, attitudes, and his way of bringing out creativity in the acts that he works with. It's very, very, very interesting. And I think, as somebody who has worked with him, which you have, I think you will probably have a deeper appreciation of it, maybe even than most. But it's an extraordinary documentary that I'd highly recommend you checking out.
Absolutely, yeah.
Based on what we've just been talking about, how has the role of what a manager is and the services they provide for artists changed since you started your career?
Oh, gosh. I think it's changed in so many ways. The nuts and bolts are the same, but there have been more roles, especially from the digital side. I think management had to get very competitive and be able to deliver clients certain services that weren't ever a part of it before, that were always delivered by the label. Or some other aspect. But yeah, I mean, you really have to wear every hat now, and be able to rely on no one but your own team, and be able to deliver the artist just about everything they could possibly need.
So the learning curve of elements that you had to take on as a manager has really increased. I mean, besides digital, what else was involved in that process for you and your clients?
Well, so for me, since I didn't come from a trained management background, I never worked at a management company. I'd only worked at labels. So I had a decent idea on the creative and A&R side and how to get records made for cheap. And I had a decent idea on the marketing side generally, but I had to write a marketing plan. But besides that, I mean, I had to get really educated in learning and meeting promoters. That was just something I'd never come into that much contact with. Promoters, and then honestly really digging in, figuring out the social media aspect of things, and helping coach artists, not just on, you need to be posting this or that frequently, but how to really embrace it as a medium and have their own voice, and go from there, versus just, I think major labels and a lot of labels like to sort of cram down just socials, no matter who you are. But, that can bring diminished returns, in my opinion, if the artist isn't being honest on it.
Yeah, the social media aspect, I think, is really important.
For sure.
And Eric is really kind of, he's an expert in social media. And the one thing that I've really learned from him is that social media is not a generic term, that each platform has its own unique characteristics, its own audience, and serves very, very specific niches. Did you learn with social media that it was more effective for some acts than for others, or what was your experience in the learning curve on that particular field as a manager?
Yeah, I certainly did, Rich. I noticed, some things just react on certain, like if an artist is very visual, obviously Instagram is going to be their place. It's just much more of a visual medium. If they're super active and just outspoken and want to be in the conversation, Twitter is a great platform for that. It definitely looked trial and error. And I mean, when I say social media, I mean, I'm talking about going back to as early as the MySpace days, when that was part of strategies. Yeah, 2003, 2004, that started to become part of strategies, and we've seen things just sort of left on the field since then. I mean, I think we've had to. I can't name all the platforms, but there's been almost a dozen that have come and gone that we've tried to apply some sort of sense to, or at least get ahead of it and see if it works and see if it's capable.
I think the music industry has played a great part in that, where we've taken the platforms and try to, use them for what we can.
Absolutely. I mean, I remember a time when I was direct marketing on Facebook And the comments that we would get back would be like, "This isn't my space. Get your artist off here." It was quite funny.
Interesting.
It was in the very early days. Yeah, no one was receptive to it in the first probably 6 to 9 months of it being public.
Yeah, and yet the thing is that, you know, as you study Facebook, it's like its own evolution. It started as something besides what it's become. I mean, now I look at Facebook as kind of like the social town square, you know, where a lot of people go, families, in a way to keep into, you know, and it's become so much more. I mean, the cultural impact. I mean, if you watch, you know, even what's going on in politics and just the enormity of the impact. I mean, it's like, who would have even thought back then that the enormity of the impact culturally, socially, politically, that Facebook would be so staggering.
Oh, absolutely. I think, unpredictable back then.
Yeah, absolutely.
Rico, you know, from your experience, when do you think an artist needs a manager today? At what point?
You know, that's a tough one, because I think every artist is different. Some folks just can never get past go themselves, and that doesn't mean that they need a manager. It just means they might need somebody kind of whispering in their ear here or there, or a bit of direction. I always say it's like when there's something to manage, and that's a bit generic, but I think everyone knows that feeling. Like, if you're waiting around for the knight in shining armor and not going out there 100% on your own to be able to at least have some things checked off the list, then you don't need a manager. You just need some more discipline and some tenacity. You know, I can't really come in on a project until there's someone for each sort of, you know, like each sort of team member needs someone to really write the plan and keep it going. Otherwise, I mean, in today's age, it's a couple $100 a month spent on ads and things like that, and some low cost touring. You can do a heck of a lot by yourself, unless you're really trying to go the pop route. But anything else, I mean, look at SoundCloud and the avenues that are opened up for hip hop.
Oh my God, it's amazing. I mean, huge avenues that start there, but then, you know, evolve. Can you talk about some of the things specifically? I mean, you mentioned, you know, coming in and, you know, until there's something to manage, which I totally understand what you mean by that. But speak to specifically the kinds of things that you may be looking for when you're considering taking on a client in regards to that particular statement. What are they a record release? Are they a website? I mean, what specific things do artists need to be aware of?
I would say that, you know, being able to develop yourself to some degree slightly outside the spotlight is super important these days, because I feel like people put up too much, whether that's music or content, trying to get the following going before their artistic identity is fully realized, or sort of a little more fully baked, if you will.
Yeah, so it's content without context.
Exactly. So that's my number one thing. And when I say someone to manage, I mean, I will come into something if I love it. If I hear someone and go, you know, they just need a little coaching on the songwriting, and maybe that's just doing a few sessions with a few people, and this thing is ready to roll. There's always moments. I mean, I'll sign things if I love it. If I love it, I can wake up for it and fight for it every day and be happy because I love the music that much, then that means it was ready for me. If not, you know, there's certain things where they make a lot of money, they need management, they switch management frequently, and those are the kinds of things that I don't love to manage, because I usually end up swimming against the current with the artist versus swimming with them. There's always a feeling of you're either swimming with the same current with your client or you're not. I like to be.
You like to be in the long-term situations where it's going to be growing together.
Yeah. If you wake up every day having to fight your client, it's a bad situation. I always like to be fighting someone else on my client's behalf.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's like, Lord knows you have to fight enough people in this business. You don't want to be fighting your own clients. So, you know, It's interesting in hearing that. I imagine that throughout your career, I am sure you've come across a lot of very, very talented artists that, for a variety of reasons, you chose not to work with. And I think, given that, can you discuss with us what are the non-creative qualities? Meaning, you know, you said, you know, if I love something, meaning like the music. And I get that, but what are the non-creative qualities you look for in an artist that you're serious about taking on? Because I know those things exist, even if people don't necessarily speak about them. And can you speak about that? Yeah, because I think that's important.
Yeah, I mean, look, anybody that's successful, Rich, and I know both of you have been around very successful artists, where you know that they got to be sharp. They've got to want it. Otherwise, what am I doing here? I can only help put wind in the sails.
You can't want it more than they do.
Exactly. So, I mean, to me, those are the things. Like, I want someone who's tenacious. I want someone who needs to have it. Maybe it's not because money. Maybe it's because just simply this is all they can do and all they know how to do, and it's where their passion lies. And also someone who gets it, who understands, hey, we can make all the art we want to in a vacuum by ourselves, and maybe that's rewarding enough as it is for some people. But if you want to go do art and commerce, then you've got to really put a plan together, and you've got to go and do it, and that comes with some sacrifices here and there. And that's sort of what I call like getting it, wanting to win. It doesn't mean you have to sell out. It doesn't mean you have to do anything cheesy or that you wouldn't, say things in your art that you normally wouldn't say. It's just you want to go and win on the commerce side too, which is perfectly fine.
Okay, so you're looking for somebody with a committed vision for themselves and who knows who they are, what they want to do, and is moving things along with or without a manager. I mean, obviously.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, all right.
What are the most common and preventable mistakes that you see new artists make today?
Probably the most common thing, I don't know that it's just relative to today, but I dislike sort of things that are already worn out, repeating themselves over and over and over. So I think young artists, because of the ease of making new music, making content, the ability to distribute it instantly, and kind of grow a fan base that may check in with you from time to time, it's very easy to just to be copycat. I think that's my number one turnoff. Is I see a lot of okay, a lot of mediocrity, and it's not hard to be mediocre or decently good. You know what I mean? I think that's almost a base level now in sort of the scape of music, just because everything has become so much easier, whether it's music videos or content in general. Yeah, I mean that's probably my number one mistake. And my other, the other mistake is what I sort of touched on earlier, is don't put it all out there too quick or all at one time. Always put out your best stuff. Keep it honest, obviously, to you and to your brand and to your culture, but always strive to put out the best stuff and don't do things half-ass.
Do you feel that the discovery and exposure process of music today has changed the way you reach the audience and market to it from a manager's perspective?
Yeah, completely.
Good. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, it's one of those tough things, even for me to sort of qualify it fully, because maybe a better example is how to take something genre-wise, because I think the way I look at things now, it's like I don't really have an urban client, right, currently on the roster I work with, so I tend to fall behind certain things in that world. But I'll say I just signed this new singer-songwriter guy named Evan Bartles. Went to Nashville, blew me away, saw the first show, jaw dropped, signed it, and now I'm sort of reverse engineering it. He's got a lot going on. He's touring constantly in the Midwest, touring constantly in the South, but the DSPs don't know about him yet. Supervisors don't really know about him yet, but it's all the kind of stuff that they'll love. But I'm more sort of infatuated by how he found this fan base without anybody else touching it, which was really cute to me. And some of it's calculated, most of it's not. A lot of it has been boots on the ground and word of mouth. So that's something for me that's like I can have. It's almost the same as it was 10 years ago, because nothing replaces sort of good old fashioned boots on the ground touring and shaking hands.
Yeah.
But what's crazy is that what we couldn't do is also have a giant contingent from Brazil or Chile or Sweden or whatever also knowing about it, also enthusiastic about it. And if we go there, potentially the same ability to sell out shows and things like that. So to me, it's like I look at that where we would look at data previously, market by market. Now I get it all real time, constantly, around the world, and it's very hard to sort of read the tea leaves sometimes. It's a good problem to have, and it's also like a difficult problem to have. It's sort of where do we focus our time, and how do we tackle this, and where do we want to spend the money?
Yeah, where do we put the game plan? You mentioned something that I just want to follow up on really quickly with you, which is, you mentioned different kinds of styles of music and different markets. Do you think as a manager that it's important for you to have an understanding of the culture of the music, where it comes from with the artists that you're dealing with?
For sure. Every genre. I'm dealing with that on a DJ client right now in the electronic world. And with me not necessarily having come up fully in that world, I've got a very good understanding of it. But there's things that I miss culturally, where on the club circuit, and especially like in-house music, how subdivided the genres are and things like that, where I may think that one thing is this, and they're like, no, we can never be that. That's too whatever, so understanding the culture of that is something I'm still digging into, and I'm deep in it.
And you're not, and I was just going to ask you just another thing off that, because I noticed you mentioned different types of artists. So you're not genre specific as a manager. You're kind of taking on different genres.
I'll take on anything. Absolutely. With the exception of very, very, unless I feel like a client is like potentially dangerous to themselves or other people,
right?
then I probably won't touch it. But yeah, no, if I feel like I can kind of do anything. I feel like half of it is just doing the work, right? So half of it is the same game plan of giving the artist guidance that they need, whether that's career or even personal and psychological, and making sure that you've got a game plan. A lot of this is just coaching. I see myself as a coach more than anything else. Teaching people how to play on their strengths, improving their weaknesses, but really just, getting their voice together, getting their identity together, helping them create a culture around what it is that they're doing, and then you just go. And a lot of it, that is trial and error, but most of it's hard work. And you bring on the right team and right partners and go, and then the rest is sort of up to luck.
Today, we see so many acts who have built significant audiences for themselves that aren't necessarily famous. How are they finding their audiences?
I would say that probably each one is different. I mean, there's YouTube artists that have a complete different following than, say, a jam band following might be, but they can both put butts in seats. It's always word of mouth. And social media is just a great megaphone for amplifying that word of mouth. The question is tough to answer, because how are they finding their audiences? I mean,
yeah, because
we all do.
We're seeing it every day. I go through my Instagram and I'm going, where the hell did these guys freaking come from? I mean, you go and you look at their numbers and they're like selling out places, and you're like, wow.
Oh, for sure. I mean, some of this stuff can be fly by night, just pure accidental luck. Like there's several artists, I'm sure, in the trades right now that you've been seeing that are unsigned, and there's a derby for because they're on the Spotify top 50 or whatever, and it's only a few weeks old, or there's a TikTok video that's blowing up, and then that becomes sort of so I mean, those are instant ways for obviously people to get introduced to somebody, whether or not you want to hitch your wagon to it. I sort of call that, like, that's things you almost can't avoid. They become cultural memes, like to the point of the blinking lights. Sure, you can look at that for a moment, but is it going to be a tribe that you want to be a part of?
Yeah, and it's an interesting point, Rico, because it also begs the question, too, in terms of, as a manager and even as a label, like what you were pointing out just now, is that, hitch your wagon to, but, can they have even a career beyond this initial hit record, or, beyond the initial moment? Is there a career there? I mean, I think that about, like Lil Nas X. I mean, it is interesting. They were able to get a second single. It wasn't as big as the first. Okay. But I'm asking, is there a career here? Or is it just a moment, a long moment, because he had such an impact? But you're seeing this as you're speaking about it over and over and over with so many different kinds of acts. Yeah.
It's something I think we're going to continue to see for quite some time. And to me, it's two different music businesses going on. It's how it's always been. We've always had one-hit wonders that will never stop. We've always had things that were sort of more celebrity or about fame versus the music. That's never going to stop as well. But what you do have, which is cool, is you really have this interesting now, like, everyone lives a bit in their own silo, a little bit in their own echo chamber, but more and more people are seeking out. This is transcending genres right now, is what I'm seeing. People are really looking for honesty. I feel like in the past year, 2 years, real emotive connection. It's happening across the board. So I notice a shift there where I'm like, oh, this is kind of starting to come back the other way, where people might be tired of what I call sort of like the meme single, if you will. You know what I mean? It's kind of like a meme on Twitter or Instagram, where it will be hilarious. It's ubiquitous for a month or two, then it kind of goes away. There we are. There's something new to replace it.
I hear what you're saying, and I see it illustrated. I mean, Billie Eilish is a great example of that, of the principle you're speaking of. And the other thing that I see, which is very interesting to me, having been in the business as long as I have, with regards to new artists, is that the personal narrative of the artists themselves, you know, what you're talking about with that level of honesty, that level of their background, who they are, what they stand for, what are their values, what's important to them, that has become so much more important than in any other era that I can recall, probably since the 60s, where, you know, and you speak about that level of honesty is crucial. And if you don't have that, if it's just, you know, I'm fabulous and, you know, my life is great and I'm beautiful and I look great, that, you know, well, there's a dime, you know, those are a dime a dozen, those kinds of acts. And like you said, you know, meme culture and, you know, and there's a lot of that kind of thing on Instagram where it's, you know, this is me and I'm looking great and it's all about, you know, my life is fabulous and yours isn't. But we're seeing, I agree with you. I think we're seeing a time where there is such a craving for, you know, something that's honest and real and authentic. And what's most encouraging to me about it is from an A&R standpoint, I'm seeing a lot of acts that are finding connections with an audience that aren't necessarily what you'd call mainstream acts, and that aren't even acts, like Eric was saying, that are famous and that are getting big, but don't have, you know, big notoriety in the public's mind.
But they're building audiences and
yes.
They're building touring, you know,
bases.
big
yes.
touring bases.
And there's agents that tell me about this, and I'm like, you know, where is it coming from? And a lot of it is coming from the fact that these people have an ability to connect with their audience directly. They don't necessarily need a label to do that on the level that they're doing it. And it's interesting because a lot of labels will tell you, you know, they struggle with this too, that money, power, and market share aren't necessarily the things, they don't carry the power and the cachet that they used to years ago. And that's quite interesting to me as well, because it's changing the nature of all of that. You know, let me ask you then, you know, in your experience then, is success being redefined for music artists today based on that? Do you feel?
Yeah, I would say that's a pretty good way to look at it. I mean, I think there's multiple ways I define success, and probably a lot of artists do, but yes, because I mean, you probably know this too, guys. It's like when I look at, you know, I look at Polestar a lot because the number one indicator to me of does anybody care about an act is whether or not they'll part with $20 to $200 and leave the house and go somewhere. And touring is probably as healthy, if not healthier, than it's ever been at any in time. It's insane. So there's a demand for this. So touching on what you were saying earlier is that there is no monoculture sort of to impress anymore, or to be sort of, you know, plastered across, quote unquote, their billboards. So you're still seeing a lot of metrics of success. If you can do 1,000 tickets a night as an independent band or artist, you know, in 50 different markets, that's fantastic business. And it leaves you at least with a place to grow from as well, if you do reach sort of more of a, you know, mass media success out of it. But yeah, some people might get to the point where people are just happy where they're at because they've got their tribe and they go directly to them and they don't need to ask anybody permission or pay anybody else to be involved. And it's a great career.
Hey Insiders, we hope that you're enjoying our featured interview. Before we dive back in, a word from our sponsor. So hey Rich, tell me a little bit about the Music Business Registry.
Well, what we are, Music Business Registry is the leading contact directory. We publish all of the most current, accurate, and up-to-date contact information for the music industry. We do directories for A&R. We do directories for music publishers. We do directories for film and television music. We do directories of artist managers, and we do directories of music attorneys. And we also sell other publications too, like the Indie Bible series, the YouTube Bible series, the Indie Spotify Bible series, and other things as well. That's what we're about.
So if I wanted to find out, let's say, the music supervisor for American Horror Story, I can kind of go into the Film and TV monthly and find the information that I need there?
Well, we don't list specific shows. What we do list is if you know who the music supervisor is, and you can find that out on IMDb, then you can find their contact information. And we have that in our Film and Television Music Monthly. Absolutely, yes.
That's great. And I hear that we have a discount right now. If you go to musicregistry.com and use coupon code MUBUTV10 at checkout, you'll receive 10% off your first order.
That's absolutely correct. Yeah, we offer that to all of the MUBUTV insiders.
So insiders, check out musicregistry.com and use MUBUTV10 as your coupon code.
Yeah, and it's interesting is, when you talked about Polestar, the interesting thing I find about a lot of the acts that do very successful business on the live circuit are not necessarily artists that have hit records. And I find the converse to be true as well. I find a lot of people who have enormous hit records, nobody wants to go see them. Now, that's not true across the board, but it is true on a number of, especially, pop and hip hop acts. Not all of them have a base of people that want to go see them live. It's fascinating, even though they may have a big hit record or two big hit records, or more. And that's very, very interesting to me, because you have to wonder, what is it that gets some, why is Frank Ocean, who has never had a hit record in his career, why is he able to do, 2,000 and 3,000 seaters a night, across the country? I mean, just the announcement that he's going to show up at something is like, you talked about, like, what are people willing to spend between $20 and $200 on? Well, there's a great example of it. And it's not based on hit records. It's based on something else.
Yep.
It probably is.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, Frank is one of those. But I mean, Frank is in a different league than most people are doing what he does.
Right.
Yeah.
It's his artistry, I think, that speaks to the people.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let me ask you, Rico, it seems that today an artist just developing themselves as an artist and, making music is not enough anymore if you want to survive. Do you think it's important that artists today become brands? And if so, often this means the manager taking the lead on this to cultivate those relationships for their clients. What are your thoughts on this?
That's another sort of touchy subject as well, because I think it just depends on, it really does depend on the artist. But I try to put this into every sort of plan with an artist where we try to remove the word brand versus a culture that they create that then anybody can touch into that. You know what I mean? So any, quote, brand could touch into that artist's culture and get part of their audience, perhaps, or the culture can be affiliated with that brand. Unless it's the type of artist that can really actually sell a peripheral product like a makeup or perfume or something like that. You know what I mean? Other than that, you're just lending your culture to a brand for them to try to get some of your audience. I've never actually gone and made a full product with an artist before, outside of just regular merch. It would be interesting. Most people I have that wanted to get into something peripheral besides the music, it's either like they want to start their own independent label or perhaps their own publishing company and sign young writers to groom and things like that, or build a studio that is also a commercial studio, stuff like that. But it's never going to go away. We only have more brand integration now than I think we'll be seeing a heck of a lot more in the future.
Really, you mean more brand integration?
Really?
Ways.
Yeah.
Yes.
Wow.
And I think it'll be something that will probably end up being more subtle. You could see brands playing a role. I mean, they already are in many ways, playing a benefactor role in certain contexts, especially in certain genres where they just have money to spend. There's maybe much less strings attached to it, and the artist can really make some money and make cool art without anyone looking over their shoulder too much. So some of that I applaud. I think that's great.
Yeah, it's interesting because the stigma, when you got into this business, the view around this kind of subject that we're talking about was not the same as it is today. The values around it, and that's interesting. It's like, one of the subtler, more nuanced things that I have learned in the business is that when you go through a revolution, of course, not only do habits change, that's the given, but underneath it, and we've seen this in so many areas, the other ramifications of any kind of revolution are that the values change. And that I've seen very, very much so in music, in branding, in television, in exposure, in like what you were talking about with regards to like that level of honesty, what people want, what people expect, what people will react and won't react to. A lot of that is values based. Today, and in a different way than it was perhaps years ago, where if you tied in with a product or a brand, or whatever, that you were looked upon as a sellout. I mean, there was an era, prior to MTV, literally, Rico, where if you appeared on television, you were considered a sellout. You just didn't do that.
Yeah.
For the most part, you just didn't. And there were not a lot of, there's like maybe, Don Kirshner's rock concert or, which appeared at, late night at midnight, you could watch the show, like when nobody's watching television back then. But that was it, and it just, it's kind of like this evolution. So that's why I was, curious as to, with Eric's question, what you were saying.
We've seen the same thing in cinema, though, too, as well, with actors and actresses. I mean, there used to be a time when you only did commercials in foreign markets.
Exactly, yeah. Japan
you've got George Clooney selling
Nespresso now. Yeah, he got $30 million for that deal.
Wow, yeah, and it's like, he's not looked upon as, as a bad thing.
Because it's just commonplace now. It's just become accepted now.
Yes.
I guess it's just like what you said, the culture has changed and the mindset has changed.
Yeah, or what's her name? Jennifer Aniston and the other one that do makeup ads for Lancome and for Gucci.
Sure.
And Angelina Jolie doing, ads for Louis Vuitton.
It's almost a given now that a new brand, whether it's an artist or an actress, they have this vertical integration that's going into place where they already know there's going to be a perfume on this. This is,
Yeah, and then it's always interesting to me when you get people that won't do it. I mean, they're very few, but right. Adele was a standout to me because at the height of her fame, she made a decision, and the press wrote a lot about it, the music press, that it is fascinating that, all that money on the table, and she turned it all down. She just did not feel comfortable endorsing or hooking up with these kinds of things. It's like, and when they asked her about it years later, she said, I made enough money from the sales of my records and I didn't feel this need to like get involved with something. She says it doesn't mean that I'm not involved with like charities and things, but I don't like do the endorsement thing. And that's very, 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 very rare, especially among new artists.
Yes, for sure. And like I said, I think that changes just because the norm has become it's okay, or it's at least no one, half the time I honestly don't think people even notice, or they don't even just pay attention to it anymore. It's become so normal. But it's respectable. Like I said, going back to honesty, it's very respectful when an artist says, no, that's just not something I would align my art or my values with. Great, no problem.
Yeah, exactly. And that they
that's
have
how
the courage.
I see it,
yeah, and they have the courage to say that and not, whore themselves out for, another check, which is what, a lot of people do, hooking up with that for that. I want to sort of switch subjects here on a subject that you've talked about, which is, the touring aspect, and you mentioned that before. Let me ask you, as a manager, at what point does an artist or a band need to be at before they can get an agent?
Oh, that is the age-old question. I've seen it cycle through a couple different ways since I've been doing it. It used to be that you could, with some relationships, get an agent pretty quickly. That agent actually had some power to force you on to maybe some of their other clients' tours, or clients are at the same agency, or they've just got enough juice to deliver a few things, and you could get it kickstarted. Then it became harder for a little while, I noticed, because I think maybe agents were signing too many things. For a while, agents were on things really early, signing stuff well before they were signed, kind of being part of the development process, throwing a lot of things at the wall as well, to be honest, creating a bunch of external noise that I think was unnecessary. And then now it's back to, it's almost harder than ever to get a good agent.
Yeah, or to even get one.
Yeah.
Yeah. as we've seen sort of the big agencies somewhat consolidate too, I think probably what you're going to see is probably a lot of agents leaving, some of the big guys, and
it's already happening, and they're starting their own thing.
It's already happening. Yep. At some point, those become. It's always hard. It's the same thing with managed companies too. It's like, what are you? If your entire business is a service-based business and you're not owning any kind of IP or anything like that, at the end of the day, it's sort of like, can you really go to Wall Street? I suppose you can try.
Yeah, and that imploded on the big ones. It imploded on William Morris Endeavor. I mean, they had to pull their whole thing back, and that's
that IPO.
Yeah, that IPO it didn't work.
Yep.
Realistically, what can a new act expect from a club tour in terms of dollars?
Club, if we're defining club as between 300 to 500 cap, something like that. It depends. It depends on if we're talking about what are they actually going to net out at the end of the day. It just depends on what kind of production you bring, how big your band is, how big your crew is, how you're doing the tour, how much you're charging for tickets. You know what I mean? If they're $15 or if they're $40, depending on what people are willing to play. But realistically, not a ton on the club level side. If you're talking about a 4-piece band with a tour manager in a Sprinter van, doing hotels and selling 500 tickets a night, you're going to net out. I hate throwing around imaginary numbers, but probably no more than about $1,000 a show if you're not cutting tons of corners. Things are just expensive, It depends on but some bands will just rough it. They'll sleep in their own, crappy van that they own and just go and tough it out for a few tours. And then you could actually make okay money.
You mean okay money in the future, or?
I mean, okay money for the time being.
For the time,
right.
If you got four 21-year-olds in a van and they're willing to sleep in it most of the time, and they're getting $2,000 guarantees, and they've only got $500 of expenses per night, then yeah, okay, everyone's walking away with a little bit of money. But the real money starts coming into play when you start getting into 1,000. 1,000 cap room plus is where you want to be. If you're doing that kind of business, you're going to have a good career. You can make a perfectly fine living.
So that's like graduating up to like the Wiltern theater level.
Yeah, exactly.
And doing that across the board.
Even El Rey, Terragram, 600, 700 cap rooms. If you're doing it smart, you can make a wonderful living doing that.
Rico, I want to go back to something that you had mentioned before, and I meant to follow up with it then, but I'd like to follow up with it now. And that's, with so many new international territories opening up over the last 5-10 years, how important is the international marketplace for breaking artists today from a manager's perspective? And you had talked about some of those, international markets when you're looking at where to begin and where to put your time, effort, and energy. Can you speak to the international market?
Absolutely. What's funny is I feel like I used to spend more time on international specific than I even do now, because it's become so much easier to sort of just get a response out of it. But I mean, back in the day, we used to a lot of times shop different. I mean, some people still do, but different territories to different labels, and we really had to be worried about who's the right UK label for this, who's going to work it in Germany, who's working it in Japan. Now you can still do that, and that might be beneficial for certain artists, but for the most part, you don't. You know what I mean? You hopefully have boots on the ground there with whatever label you're through, but I haven't cut out territories from a deal in quite some time. And if I'm going to do something like that, I'm at least going to go to the label and say, I need you to spend X amount and put this third party on it down there because you guys don't have enough, juice and for whatever. But yeah, I mean, typically it's become one of those where I've become much more US and Canada focused now than ever before, because I just have the mindset of like, you got to do it here. If you're going to export it, do it here. There's so many markets. It's insane. And if we see the embers burning in different markets, of course we'll go over. We'll do a little London club run and things like that, get introduced in the market. But a lot of times you can't let just the data from a Spotify or an Apple based on listenership dictate everything else. Because
Right.
it is expensive, and you might get there and realize like, oh, this was a small but loud contingent, and we still have a heck of a lot more work to do.
Right.
So
and it's more expensive. Yeah.
Yeah, your expenses of getting there and then touring and the taxes. And
So your mindset is more from your own backyard and build it from there.
Very much so. Yeah. Unless it's one of those fluke situations, like I said, a record just takes off in the UK or it takes off in Australia, and then you've got to go and service it, obviously. But yeah.
And in those cases, I would think internationally, they come to you and they say, we'd like to know if the band can come to England or to Germany. I mean, I would think that they're market specific, aren't they?
Very, very much so. But yeah, I'd like the idea of really building things out in the U.S. because anytime you go foreign like that, you're investing in yourself. It's going to cost you money, especially if you don't have a label to give you tour support.
Right.
Yeah, it's interesting. I remember a story that Bruce Springsteen once told that during the River Tour, he was doing arenas, multiple nights of arenas in 1980. And he had never really broken Europe. I mean, he had performed there in 75, 76 for different records that he had put out, but he was doing like clubs over there. And in 1980, he had never really pursued in the subsequent years, he had never really pursued building Europe the way that he had in the U.S. And so when he left the United States tour to go tour Europe on the River album in 1980, he was doing these larger clubs. He was going from 18,000 to 800 and 1,000 seater clubs, which was really remarkable. But he spoke about that it was really essential to build that base, for the years to come, that that was how you did it, that by going over. And one thing that I think I hear a lot of managers talk about today with regards to this question is that you can't really build or dominate in those markets unless you're physically there. You can have hit records, but if you don't support the hit records by being there, it's kind of like having a relationship with somebody who's never around. You will eventually move on. And that's what happens. You got to be careful with that not happening to your act because, and I guess that's where it becomes. Have you ever gone over to London or to Germany to do things with your artists there?
Oh, yeah, all the time. I've done European tours with clients, some European arena tours before. I mean, you name it. I love it. It's interesting. It's always fun. I tend to find that the audiences in a lot of foreign markets they're not better. They're just more hungry. They are just living in the moment. Cause I don't think they get it all the time. Especially from American, bands.
Right.
In certain markets, there's certain places where people don't go to frequently. So when the audience has their moment to be with the artist, it feels more special sometimes.
Yeah, it's very interesting. It's a very, very good point, and it's sort of it's a point that I don't think a lot of people get all the time. Last year the Rolling Stones put out a documentary called Ola, which was a documentary that covered their South American tour. They did this tour of South America, which they had not been to. Some countries, it's hard to believe in a 50-year career, some countries they had never been to. And this tour was 9 different countries, 16 shows, and it finished in Cuba, which they had never ever played before. But what was so interesting about it was that the documentary doesn't cover the Rolling Stones on stage. I mean, you get an occasional glimpse of maybe half a song or half a verse or something. It covers the experience of the people in that territory and their reaction, like what you were saying, like how they've never seen them before and how this one group had enormous fan clubs and culture clubs literally built around the Rolling Stones, and how the Stones heard about this and took time to meet with them and go out and see the culture and see the people, and it was so fascinating because that point that you made about how they don't get that all the time, and you see the specialness of that. Like here for 50 years they've grown up with this music, and now suddenly for the first time in their life
they're getting to see them. I mean, that's inconceivable. It's like inconceivable to us here because we get everything. We take it for granted.
We take it all for granted. We get what we want when we want on whatever day we want in whatever city we're in.
Particularly here in LA.
On whatever device we want.
We're completely spoiled.
Wherever. We're completely spoiled. So on a high definition 4K, whatever, it doesn't matter. So it was interesting to see that. But I mean, it's to your point which I wanted to comment on. That's a very interesting observation that, different cultures and different areas don't always have the same values around music. And when you see that, like when you're in Europe, that they really are passionately committed to it, it's a very, very interesting thing, and it helps build that, the career. I think that's an important aspect in anybody's career. So
let me ask you, Rico, are there certain territories, keeping with the subject, are there certain territories more open to specific styles than others?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think especially when we're speaking about American sort of exports, right? So, I mean, I think you're starting to see country export much better and differently than I think it ever did before. Yeah. There are obviously certain things that just really, South America loves rock. They just love rock still. All the 90s and early 2000s big rock guys, they can still go down there and act like the years never moved on. It's right. Really interesting.
Yes.
I used to go to Japan a little more frequently with certain types of artists. They also love rock too, but they also loved a lot of singer-songwriter stuff that I would work with from time to time. And that was an interesting audience. I always thought, because I'd been at shows where there'd be a club of 500-600 people and they would all sit down. There was no chairs, but they would just sit down or sort of kneel to show respect during the whole show. Yeah. Unbelievable.
And they were silent. They listened to every word.
Completely silent. There wasn't a phone out. There was no one talking. Yeah.
Yeah, they're very reverential. Yeah. That's interesting. I mean, if you ever see there was a thing of so many artists like Bob Dylan or even Cheap Trick did shows at Budokan. I mean, you see that very quality you're talking about in that hall.
Now they're more animated, but it's I guess a big part of the culture.
Yeah. Very much so.
Rico, throughout your career as a manager, I'm just wondering, are there any books or movies that have really resonated with you professionally speaking that you could recommend to our audience?
Oh man, that's always a tough question.
Oh, okay.
It's funny. I read a lot of books. I'm always trying to remember which one from book to book made a great impact on me. I mean, definitely. I suggest everybody starting off or successful already, go back and always get whatever new edition of Donald Passman's book comes out. I remember reading that as I was probably 14 or something, whatever edition that was. And that gave me, I feel like, a head start. Just out of the gates, just knowing what's what and what terms are and things and what the roles of different companies and partners and everything throughout the music industry are. You know what I mean? I think people will be surprised at how undereducated you may find yourself at any point, especially living in today's climate where you could probably go back and work on some fundamentals and some footwork of the music industry, to have a better a better macro view of how things work. So that's a book that definitely changed my entire perspective. I felt like I was armed with a lot of knowledge. That's everything you need to know about the music business. As far as movies go, man, are we talking music movies?
I mean, anything that might have influenced you,
that might have, or that inspired you, or you thought, wow, this was really, really phenomenal. This was great, or I loved it for this reason, or whatever.
The Joe Cocker documentary, Mad Dogs and Englishmen.
Oh, okay. Wow, okay.
Left a mark on me. I think that's where I really discovered Leon Russell. That opened the doors for me to really just get into a lot more what was going on with British rock and roll back then. It was just a moving, it's just an interesting moving film as well.
Yeah, Bonnie and Delaney, Bonnie Bramlett, and all of that great stuff. And then they went on to work with Eric Clapton and Leon Russell and the Shelter People and that whole kind of, I remember that. And then, all of those people that, all their careers took off in the next, 3 to 5 years after that documentary came out. Yeah, when they did that. I mean, Leon's career, and he had hits, and, Joe Cocker certainly had a big career, and Bonnie and Delaney had a career, and, all of those people within that documentary. Sort of a lot of them broke out.
Absolutely, and those performances really stuck with me for some reason. Even though I was a kid who listened to every single kind of music out there, but there's something about those performances in that documentary that were just really, really moving to me.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's a great one, and it's interesting to hear you speak about that, because I don't think anyone in that we've ever asked that question to has ever mentioned that one.
Yeah,
before.
that's a rare one. It's an obscure one, so it's good.
It's an obscure one, so that is good.
Rico, what advice do you have for someone who wants to pursue a career as an artist manager?
You got to love it. You got to be able to wake up every day. Like I said, it's about the clients. You've got to find the right clients, the right chemistry, the clients that want to work harder than you constantly, and that you can wake up every morning for and be okay whether or not you're getting paid. That you love it enough that you do it for free. If you start there and be honest with yourself and keep it honest with yourself and your clients, you're probably going to have success. It's really about tenacity and chemistry. And if you don't have the right vision for that particular client, you should drop them, because it's always going to it's never going to get there. That's another thing. I've felt like I've spent way too much time with certain clients that I knew deep down I was like, this is never going to work. We're just not compatible. I can put them on a path that feels like it's somewhat successful, but I may not have the vision for it. You got to be able to walk away from that. So
it's interesting that you would know that deep down inside, but yet continue to work with it until it reaches its natural conclusion. That's one of those experience insights.
Sometimes the money is good. Sometimes you may have an emotional relationship with the person or the people that you don't want to let them down. But I've certainly been in a situation before where I'm like, I'm just not the right guy for this. Yeah, I can spin the plates here for a bit, but I feel like someone else can do a much better job.
Yeah, but if you want to grow this and build it, yeah,
exactly.
And be the understanding of it. Rico, professionally speaking, what have your biggest mistakes taught you?
Yeah. Well, biggest mistakes, I'm trying to think of what those could be. Probably placing too much trust in anyone else besides yourself, I think is definitely one of my biggest mistakes. Meaning, just as there's no knight in shining armor for the artist necessarily to figure everything out, there's no knight in shining armor for the manager either. And I think I put trust in third parties sometimes to deliver things that they don't or can't, or that I had too much faith in. Also, like I said, what I referenced earlier is about knowing when to step away from a client. That is probably my biggest mistake, of carrying on things too long that had just run its course. The relationships that had run their course, and for whatever reason, both parties try to sit there and muscle it into working, but it doesn't in the end. It's taught me to move on when I know the wind isn't blowing in my direction.
Right. Now, flipping this on the other side, what advice can you offer for artists and bands who want to build a career for themselves in music? What would you tell them?
So I think a lot of what we touched on earlier. Read Donald Passman's book so that you have at least a working knowledge of what terms mean, who's who, and who does what on your team, and how to hold them accountable. I mean, really, that's what this is at the end of the day. If you want to be successful, you're going to have people that work on your behalf. And if you don't know what they do or what they're supposed to be doing, then you're never going to be able to hold them accountable. So it's about accountability to yourself and keeping your team accountable to you. And then from there, you don't have to be involved in every single day-to-day decision that might get made, but you want to have a good working, like, macro level knowledge of the industry and what the heck your team is doing. Also, be true to yourselves. Try to be leaders as well, because for everyone that's going to work with you, success, it definitely comes from a team that's bigger than just your manager or agent as well. It's everybody working at the label, everybody working at the publisher, everybody working at each individual club and promoter you might be working with. You know what I mean? So if you can't motivate people to want to win for you, it's hard to have success without that. Besides that, just make great, honest music. But I can't guarantee that your music will just connect. But if you're always cool and working hard and really know how to lead, you'll get somewhere if you're tenacious and keep it up.
Rico, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to do this. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Always good to speak to you both.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I love Rico. He's just, full disclosure here, he is not only a great guy, but Rico was a student of mine. He was in my very first music business class that I taught in 2002 at Musicians Institute. He was one of those people in the class. And, he's gone on to have a very, very successful career for himself. He's worked with a lot of talent over the years. And
very knowledgeable.
Very, very knowledgeable. And, he's been on the front lines. One of the most interesting things he said was at the top of the interview, Eric, where he talked about the changing role of the manager.
Right.
And he said something very interesting. He said, so much of what the record label used to do
is now the role of the manager.
Exactly. And if you don't fill that in yourself,
and I know that from experience, just,
exactly.
Yeah.
You're shit out of luck.
Yeah. And he said that the nuts and bolts have stayed the same. That's always stayed, but, it's gone more into, what the label was doing, like client services. It's become that kind of thing now where managers are now becoming a full service thing, and they're doing that entire 360-degree approach. Knowing all the areas that if you're a manager now and you don't know what's going on in social media and in your other areas, you're just lost in an abyss because things have just, changed so greatly. But yeah, I did agree with that.
And you can't serve your clients' needs.
Exactly.
At all. I mean, there are managers who, don't know that, but I think that those are managers who either have people in their company who do, or are people who are working with
Or they
artists.
have a team that they've got those people specializing in social media and all those different areas.
And remember, like we've talked countless times, Eric, social media is not a generic term.
Correct.
It is not a generic term. It means something different. The platforms mean something different depending on who you are, the type of music, and the type of audience that you're trying to reach. But you as a manager, as a new manager with a new artist, need to understand that. That's really crucial.
Yeah, and one of the other really, really great points in this interview was, when do you need a manager?
Oh, question it's always asked.
Yeah, and I thought that, he said that, every artist is different and every situation is different, which I definitely agree with him. And, another one, which is a very common answer, is when there's something to manage. I think a lot of times what happens is the artist thinks, if we only had a manager, that's going to be it. We're set. We're going to be signed. We're going to be selling millions of records. This guy is going to get us to where we need to go. And that's just not the case. He put it in terms of the knight in shining armor, which I have noticed that as well, too, dealing with clients of mine in the past, where it's like they just think just because we've got it, it's going to be like, that's it. We're on the high road.
Like, I don't have to do that work anymore.
Exactly.
And let me tell you, there was a time maybe in the 70s or early 80s where that may have been true, when there was an infrastructure and a system in place to support talent. Unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, that era is over.
Yep.
It doesn't exist anymore. And, when there's something to manage is a mouthful. And I say that because it means when you, the artist, when you, the band, have done the sufficient work necessary to get your career. Look at it on a spectrum. Look at it from 1 to 100. Let's say, 0 being, you're just starting out, 100 being that, you've got a career, you're making money, you're doing really well. The labels pretty much want you to be at between 40 and 50,
right.
At least.
At least halfway there.
At least halfway
there.
They'll
get you the other half there.
But you have to bring yourself up to the visibility level of a 40 or 50, which means doing a lot of work, social media-wise, gig-wise, performance-wise, having some kind of, communication base with your audience.
And the great news is that you can do a lot of this by yourself already without the need of any manager. I mean, you really don't need a manager when you think about it. If you can assemble your team of guys in the band or whoever you have there, you can assign different roles and you can get a lot of this work done by yourself. So
absolutely. And, and he talked about SoundCloud and how so many artists had broken out of that by doing precisely what you just said, by doing that work, by promoting that, I mean, a lot of people came out of SoundCloud, very successful, mainly in the hip hop area.
In the hip hop, yeah.
Where there was, but that particular form of music connected on hip hop, and you had a lot of people that were listening and who started their career from that base and were able to build from that point on.
Yeah, and one of the other areas, that we covered was, that I thought was a highlight was specific things that artists need to be aware of. And it was, basically he kind of came up with, developing yourself before you enter the spotlight, doing a lot of the trial and error before, a lot of people are just like flooring it, trying to floor, and you're flooring it to a red light. because you've got such a long road to cover that you're just trying to shoot for like a grand slam out of the gate, and that just doesn't work. You have to build towards that, the artistic identity, and that was a really important part, I thought, as far as,
I thought that was an important part too, especially when he talked about the whole idea of creating, one of the things he observed was how artists don't create enough context for their band or for their brand or for their identity.
Right.
Or even the personal narrative. Things that you and I have spoken about before, values.
Right.
What you're about. What
do you believe in?
What do you believe in? What do you care about? That is what's going to, positive,
drive the
whatever
message,
it is. That's what's going to drive the message and attract your audience.
Right.
Yes, I love that, or I believe in that too, or not for me,
right.
Whatever it is. But, to try to be one of those innocuous, I want to be everything to everyone.
Good luck. It's not going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think why should we pay attention to you? Why should we care?
Right.
I mean, look, there's 1,000 of those kinds of, put XYZ artist into this, mold.
Exactly.
And most of them won't be around, a week from now.
Right.
So, if you want to, again, we'll always talk to you, ladies and gentlemen, as this is for your career. In other words, if this is for your career, this is how you need to think about it, not as an event. And, the kinds of things that blow up or become, viral, they die just as fast.
Exactly.
They die just as fast.
You're trying to build a career here, not just, a flash in the pan. I thought the final point when we were talking about international markets and, he talked about shopping to different territories and how he was mainly focused on the US and Canada, which I thought was really important. A lot of bands, I mean, I've fallen into that trap too, where it's like, we've got to go out of here to have success. The US and Canada are such huge markets. There's so many markets in those two territories. For most of our listeners that are listening that are from the US, that you don't really need to even be thinking about that. You got to be, that the cost of going over there, the travel, the lodging, everything that you have to do for that is so much more expensive as opposed to just getting in a van here and just going out and doing what you got to do here. So I thought that was a really salient point. And another one that he talked was like, don't let the data drive your decisions fully.
Right.
In Spotify and on the DSPs, which I thought was a great point. What did you think about that?
I thought that was a great point too, because often he pointed out that, you could have certain successes with Spotify, or, you have this, big base in Germany. Do you have a big enough base to where they're going to come to your show?
Exactly.
And
because you may find that you book it and you get there and there's only like, it's only like a very much smaller than what you anticipated.
And the costs, remember, like what you said,
exorbitant.
The costs are exorbitant for a whole band to go to Europe, for a whole band to stay in Europe, lodging and food
and everything. Yeah.
Transportation. It's a lot of money. So, build your career and then get attracted. Be attractive to the overseas where you're invited and paid for, rather than trying to, push that.
Hey Insiders, thanks so much for tuning into this episode. We really appreciate it. To get show notes, links, and everything that was mentioned during this interview, head on over to our official website at MUBUTV.com/podcast/show notes. If you're enjoying the content and what we're doing here on the show, please subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcast, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts from. And don't forget to rate and review our show over at iTunes. 5-star reviews are always welcome and help to ensure that our podcast stands out on the top-rated and new and noteworthy charts on iTunes in our space. You can also find us on social media at Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, all ending with the handle MUBUTV, which is spelled MUBUTV. Don't forget to catch our flagship show, the MUBUTV Insider Video Series, airing every week on YouTube at youtube.com/MUBUTV. This show was produced and created by Rich Ezra and Eric Knight. This show would not be here if it weren't for our amazing team, which are the following: interview editors Sarah Nissenbaum and Alex Taylor, show notes and transcriptions by Jani Chang, Nicole Capodoglo, Lilia Owens, and Sarah Nissenbaum, theme music by Disciples of Babylon, and be sure to tune in next week for another episode of the MUBUTV Insider Podcast.